My name is Gabrielle Vance, and I am standing in a silent, freezing cold television studio green room that smells faintly of lemon polish and stale coffee. In exactly 3 minutes, a producer with a headset and a clipboard will knock on this door and lead me to a chair opposite Evelyn Reed, the most feared and respected journalist in the country. They'll clip a microphone to my blazer, powder my nose one last time, and a calm, disembodied voice will count down from 10. And then, after years of existing as a whisper, a footnote in my own life, I will finally be given a voice. I'm about to commit an act of what my soon-to-be ex-husband would call the ultimate betrayal, but I know it for what it truly is, the ultimate act of reclamation. He thinks the sweetest revenge is a life lived well without him. He's about to find out that he's wrong. The sweetest revenge is telling the truth on national television with time-stamped, irrefutable proof. Before I tell you what happened when that little red camera light blinked on, and how I systematically dismantled a gubernatorial campaign with a single manila folder, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. For so many of you who have followed my anonymous work, you know this story has been a long time coming. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or had your ideas stolen by someone you trusted, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here, please subscribe to join this incredible community. We're all about finding our voices here, and tonight I am finally using mine. It all started, as so many tragedies do, with a love story. I met Julian Vance in a stuffy lecture hall during our junior year at Georgetown. It was a class on modern political theory, and he was captivating. He wasn't the most diligent student. That was always me, the girl with the color-coded notes and the stack of library books threatening to topple over. But he had a fire. He could stand up in a room of 200 people and articulate a half-formed thought with such passion and conviction that you couldn't help but be swayed. I was the architect, buried in blueprints and structural calculations. He was the brilliant, charismatic salesman who could sell the dream of the building. We were, I thought, a perfect partnership. He'd often come to me the night before a big paper was due, a charmingly panicked look in his eyes. "Gabby, you're a lifesaver. I have the concept, but I can't make the words connect." I'd sit with him in the law library until 3 a.m. drinking bitter coffee from a vending machine, and I would weave his disparate, passionate threads into a coherent, powerful argument. I would structure his thoughts, sharpen his points, and find the perfect historical precedent to bolster his thesis. When he'd get an A, he would beam, lifting me up in a hug. "We did it, Gabby. We make a great team." And in those moments, flush with the thrill of shared victory and his intoxicating approval, I believed him. It was our grade, our success. I didn't see the pattern forming, the slow, insidious transfer of my intellect into his brand. We married a year after graduation, our future stretching before us like a sun-drenched highway. His ambition was the engine, and my mind, he told me, was the fuel. His first foray into politics was a run for the state assembly. It was a scrappy, underdog campaign run out of a rented storefront that always smelled of burnt popcorn. I was everything. The campaign manager, the policy director, the chief speechwriter, the scheduler. I wrote the direct mailers, I drafted the talking points for the local debates. I researched every single vote our opponent had ever cast. I remember one particular night, a week before the election, when our rival launched a vicious attack ad, accusing Julian of being soft on crime. Julian was apoplectic. He paced the tiny office, ready to fire back with pure, unfocused rage. "We have to hit him back. Harder," he yelled, slamming his fist on a desk piled high with pizza boxes. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We don't get in the mud. We rise above it." I stayed up all night, fueled by adrenaline and a pot of coffee so strong it made my teeth ache. I dug into the city budget archives and found that our opponent, during his time on the city council, had voted to cut funding for after-school programs in at-risk neighborhoods. I crafted a response, not an attack ad, but a 30-second spot featuring Julian standing in front of a shuttered community center. The script was mine, every word. "My opponent talks tough on crime," Julian said, his voice laced with a sorrowful gravity I had written for him, "but he voted to take away the very things that prevent it. He sees criminals, I see kids who need a chance." It was devastatingly effective. It reframed the entire debate. It made Julian look thoughtful and compassionate, and it made his opponent look like a cynical opportunist. We won. On election night, standing on a makeshift stage in a high school gymnasium, Julian was radiant. The crowd chanted his name. He thanked his family, his volunteers, and my incredible team whose tireless work made this all possible. He then turned and smiled at me, a wide, brilliant smile that was meant just for me. My heart swelled with pride. It was our win. That night, my best friend Sarah, who had volunteered for the campaign, gave me a hug. "He's amazing, Gabby." But he said, "My team." He meant you, right? That crime ad response was pure, uncut Gabrielle. I laughed it off, basking in the glow of our victory. "We're a team, Sarah. That's all that matters. It's our win." I believed it. I truly, desperately wanted to believe it. The move to Washington after he won a congressional seat 2 terms later was when the nature of our team began to shift. It was more subtle, more sophisticated. The stakes were higher, the spotlight brighter. My role became more defined yet simultaneously more hidden. I was no longer just the brilliant wife helping out. I was the secret engine in a much larger machine. He needed policy papers, detailed legislative proposals, and speeches that could hold their own on the House floor. My work became the bedrock of his reputation as a thoughtful, substantive legislator. But it had to remain our secret. "They'll crucify us, Gabby," he explained one evening in our beautiful Georgetown townhouse, the one his donor-funded salary paid for. He was pouring 2 glasses of expensive wine, his back to me. "The opposition, the media. They'll say you're the puppet master, that I'm just a pretty face. It will diminish the work. It will turn our ideas into a political sideshow." He turned, his face a mask of earnest concern. "This is how we protect the project. Our project. It has to be my voice, my name. It's the only way the ideas will be taken seriously." I listened, and a part of me, the part that craved his approval, the part that had built my identity around our shared success, nodded. It made a perverse kind of sense. I was a policy wonk, an introvert. I hated the glad handing, the endless cocktail parties. He thrived in that world. I could stay in the shadows where it was safe and do the work I loved. I told myself it was a strategic choice. I told myself I was protecting our mission. But what I was really doing was slowly, methodically erasing myself. My days were spent in a sun-drenched home office that looked out over a quiet, tree-lined street. While Julian was on Capitol Hill meeting with lobbyists or giving interviews, I was the one deep in the trenches of policy creation. I built a network of contacts. Academics, economists, urban planners, all of whom believed they were consulting for Congressman Vance's senior policy advisor, a role I had essentially invented for myself. I would spend hours on the phone, picking their brains, stress-testing my theories, gathering the raw materials for the legislation I was building. The Bridgewater Initiative was born in that office. It was my symphony. For 2 years I poured everything I had into it. It was a sweeping, multifaceted proposal designed to revitalize the state's struggling post-industrial cities through a combination of public-private partnerships, educational reform, and targeted investments in green technology. It was intricate, it was ambitious, and I knew with a certainty that hummed in my bones that it would work. I filled dozens of legal pads with handwritten notes. My desk was buried in economic impact reports, and my laptop's hard drive was filled with hundreds of drafts, each one meticulously time-stamped. I remember showing the first complete draft to Sarah over brunch one Sunday. She read through the executive summary, her eyes widening. "Gabby, this is Nobel Prize level stuff. This could change thousands of lives." She put the papers down and looked at me, her expression serious. "You have to get credit for this. You have to. This is too important to be just another one of Julian's talking points." "It's our signature policy," I corrected her a little too quickly. "It's what his gubernatorial run will be built on." "His run?" Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate. "You mean your run? Gabby, this is your soul on paper. Are you honestly going to just hand it over?" I felt a defensive prickle. "He's the one who can get it done, Sarah. He's the face. I'm the architect. It's the deal." "It's not a deal, Gabby," she said softly, her voice filled with a sad kaleidoscope. "It's a surrender." Her words stung because I knew they were true. The gilded cage was becoming smaller, the air thinner. The anonymity that once felt like a shield now felt like a shroud. I started attending political functions with Julian, standing silently by his side as he was lauded for his vision. I'd watch as a powerful senator or a well-respected journalist would praise a specific nuanced point in a white paper, a point I had spent 3 weeks wrestling into existence, and Julian would nod sagely, accepting the compliment as his due. "Thank you, Senator," he would say, his voice smooth as polished marble. The genesis of that particular idea came to me late one night, when I was reading through some historical precedents. He would then spin a beautiful, compelling story about his creative process, a story that was a complete and utter fabrication. And I would stand there, smiling, a polite, supportive, invisible wife. A ghost at the feast. The breaking point wasn't a single dramatic explosion, but a slow, creeping dread that finally coalesced into unbearable pressure. It happened at a Christmas party at the home of a major party donor. The house was opulent, dripping with crystal and smelling of pine and money. I was wearing a black dress that felt like a costume. A very influential columnist, a man whose opinion could make or break a political career, cornered Julian by the fireplace. "Julian, that paper on urban renewal you put out last month was brilliant," the man gushed. "Truly groundbreaking. The way you tied tax incentives to vocational training, nobody has ever framed it like that before." I had written every single word of that paper. I remembered the exact moment I'd come up with that specific framework, sitting on the floor of my office at 2 a.m., surrounded by books on urban economics. It was my breakthrough. Julian placed a hand on the columnist's shoulder, his expression one of humble genius. "Thank you, Mark. It was a tough nut to crack, but I believe it's the only way forward." He never looked at me. He never acknowledged my presence. I was a piece of furniture. In that moment, watching him so effortlessly inhabit my intellect, my labor, my very thoughts, something inside me fractured. It was a clean, silent break. I felt the warmth of the fire on my back and a chill so profound it seemed to emanate from my own bones. The pride I had once felt in our project had curdled into a cold, hard knot of resentment. I was not his partner. I was his resource. And I was being depleted. The drive home was silent. The usual post-event debrief, where I would analyze who he'd talked to and what opportunities had arisen, never happened. I just stared out the window at the blurred Christmas lights, the silence in the car a screaming void. I knew with a terrifying clarity that I couldn't do it anymore. The cost had become too high. My own identity was the price of his ambition, and I was no longer willing to pay it. The ghost wanted to be seen. A few weeks later, after the holidays had passed and the house was quiet again, I chose my moment. I found Julian in his study, reviewing polling data for his planned gubernatorial run. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times, my script for my own life. I walked in, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and closed the door behind me. "Julian," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to talk about my future." He looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at the interruption. "What about your future?" I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking. I'm incredibly proud of everything we've accomplished. But I need more. I want to build something of my own in my own name." I had a small, neat portfolio with me. It contained a few of my best non-political writing samples, articles on historical preservation and urban design that I had written just for myself. "I'm thinking of joining a think tank. Or maybe going back to school to get my doctorate. I want to co-author the official white paper for the Bridgewater Initiative when we release it. I want to be a partner in public, not just in private." I looked at him, my expression pleading, hoping he would see the reasonableness, the fairness of my request. I wasn't asking to take over. I was asking to exist. His reaction was not what I had braced myself for. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was a cold, dismissive amusement. He leaned back in his leather chair and laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "I think tank? Gabby, be serious." He gestured vaguely at my portfolio. "What is this, a hobby? You're a brilliant researcher, the best there is. That's your gift. You work behind the scenes. I'm the one who goes out and fights the wars. That's my gift. It's a perfect system. Why would you want to mess with that?" "It's not a perfect system for me anymore, Julian," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm not a behind-the-scenes person. I'm a person. I want to have a career, not just a function." The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a granite-hard fury. His eyes turned cold. "A career? You think this is the time to get selfish? We are on the verge of the governor's mansion. Everything we have worked for is right there. And you want to what? Throw a wrench in the works because you suddenly need a gold star? You're a policy wonk, Gabby. You don't have the face for television. Your voice is, it's thin. You get flustered when you're challenged. You're brilliant on paper, so stay on paper. That's your strength. Don't try to be something you're not. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of my deepest insecurities, insecurities he himself had cultivated over the years. I supported you, I whispered, the words feeling fragile and foolish in the face of his contempt. Yes, you did, he sneered, standing up and towering over me. And you have been rewarded handsomely for it. This house, this life. None of it comes cheap. This is the deal. If you can't be a supportive part of this campaign, if you're going to be a liability, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. He walked past me out of the study, leaving the door hanging open. The finality in his voice was absolute. He didn't come home that night. The next morning, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit I didn't know hand-delivered a letter. It was from Julian's lawyer. He was filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. 2 days after that, he held a press conference on the steps of the state capitol, a place I had stood with him so many times, and officially announced his candidacy for governor. And the centerpiece of his platform, the shining jewel in his political crown, was the Bridgewater Initiative. My Bridgewater Initiative. The betrayal was breathtaking in its audacity. It wasn't just the theft of my work. It was the theft of my past, my present, and the future I had poured my soul into creating. I would watch him on the news, his face filled with a passionate sincerity that made my stomach turn. He used my phrases, my cadences, my arguments. He spoke of his deep personal commitment to urban renewal, a commitment I knew he didn't possess. He was a hollow vessel filled with my words, my ideas, my passion. I fell apart. 4 weeks, I was a ghost in our beautiful Georgetown townhouse, which now felt like a mausoleum. I barely ate. I didn't answer the phone. I just sat in my office, the room where I had built his entire career, and stared at the walls. Sarah was my lifeline. She called every day, and when I wouldn't answer, she just left messages. Gabby, pick up. Please. Don't let him do this to you. Don't let him win. One afternoon, watching him on CNN, I almost did something irreparable. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the master folder labeled JV Politics, which contained every document I had ever created for him. My plan was to delete it all. To wipe the record clean. To burn the Library of Alexandria that was my life's work. As my finger was about to press the delete key, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I ignored it, but she called back immediately. And again. On the 4th try, I finally answered, my voice a hoarse croak. What? Don't you dare, she said, her voice fierce and knowing. Don't you dare delete a single word. That's not his work to destroy. It's yours to own. Pack a bag, Gabby. Get out of that house. Come stay with me. I didn't go to Sarah's. I needed to be somewhere no one knew me, somewhere the ghosts of my past couldn't find me. I packed 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a single heavy-duty external hard drive containing a mirror copy of my work. I sold my car, hired a moving company to put my books and furniture into storage, and bought a one-way ticket to a small, windswept town on the Oregon coast. I rented a tiny cottage overlooking the Pacific, a place so far removed from the marble halls of Washington, D.C. that it felt like another planet. For the first month, I just walked on the beach, the cold, salty air a balm on my raw nerves. I watched the waves crash against the shore, a relentless, churning power, and I felt a kinship with it. I was trying to wash myself clean of Julian. But the anger and the injustice still churned inside me. Sarah called me one night. Are you writing? She asked. No, I said. I don't think I have any words left. That's a lie and you know it, she shot back. You have more words than anyone I know. Write for yourself, Gabby. Anonymously. Start a blog. A newsletter. Whatever. Reclaim your voice. Even if no one knows it's you, you'll know. The next day I created a Substack account. I needed a name, a mask to hide behind. I chose Veritas. Truth. It felt right. My first post was short, an incisive analysis of a new federal transportation bill, written with the clarity and depth that had become my trademark. I didn't promote it. I just sent the link to Sarah and closed my laptop. But good work, I was learning, has a way of finding its own audience. Someone somewhere must have shared it. A few days later I had 12 subscribers. Then 50. Then 100. My second post was more ambitious. With a kind of detached, surgical precision, I began to deconstruct the Bridgewater Initiative. I didn't mention Julian. I didn't betray any personal connection. I simply analyzed it as a piece of public policy. I praised its structural ingenuity, its compassionate core. But then I began to point out the subtle, cynical ways it had been altered from its, as I put it, more intellectually honest theoretical origins. I pointed out the new loopholes for corporate donors, the softened environmental protections, the way the language had been polished to a focus-grouped sheen, losing its original radical soul. That was the post that went viral. A reporter from Politico tweeted a link to it. Whoever Veritas is, they have an insider's understanding of the Vance platform, and they are taking it apart piece by piece. My subscriber list exploded. Within 3 months, Veritas was the must-read analysis for Beltway insiders. Congressional aides, lobbyists, journalists, even a few senators were on my list. The irony was exquisite. I was once again shaping the political conversation, whispering in the ears of the powerful, but this time it was my name, albeit a pseudonym, on the masthead. The subscription fees started to pour in, enough for me to live on comfortably. For the first time in my life, I was earning a living from my own mind, under my own power. I was no one's ghost. As Julian's campaign rolled on, my critiques became more pointed. My anonymity gave me a kind of freedom I'd never known. I was beholden to no one. I could speak the unvarnished truth. The question, "Who is Veritas?" became a recurring feature in political columns. It was the ultimate parlor game in Washington. Then came the email that changed everything. It was from the executive producer of The Crucible, Evelyn Reed's show. Evelyn had just written a column about Julian's campaign, praising his signature policy but noting that the most trenchant critiques of it were coming from an anonymous Substack writer. The producer's email was brief and to the point. "Ms. Reed would like to interview Veritas. We can guarantee your anonymity, of course. A voice modulator, a shadowed silhouette, whatever you require. We believe your perspective is vital to the public discourse." I stared at the email for a long time. This was it. The crossroads. I could remain safe in the shadows, the clever, anonymous critic forever poking holes in the edifice I had built. Or I could step into the light with all the risks that entailed. I thought of Julian's smug, dismissive face. I thought of his words, "You don't have the face for television. You don't have the stomach for the fight." I took a deep, steadying breath, the salty air filling my lungs. I typed my reply. "Thank you for the offer. I will do the interview. No silhouette, no voice modulator. I am ready to use my real name." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The fight was coming, and for the first time in my life I had the stomach for it. Which brought me here, to this silent, frigid green room, my entire life packed into a single manila folder resting on my lap. The folder contained the ammunition I had so carefully preserved. Printouts of the original time-stamped drafts of the Bridgewater Initiative, emails from 2 years ago discussing its core concepts with academics, even scanned pages of my handwritten notes, my messy, passionate scrawl a testament to its true authorship. The producer knocked on the door. "Ms. Vance? We're ready for you." I stood up, smoothed down my blazer and picked up my folder. It was time. Walking onto the set of The Crucible was like stepping into another dimension. The lights were so bright they were almost hot, creating an island of intense focus in the surrounding darkness of the studio. The air was still and charged with anticipation. The crew moved with a quiet, professional efficiency. Evelyn Reed was already seated, a picture of calm authority in a sharp, tailored suit. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes, which I knew could strip a politician of his talking points in 30 seconds, held a spark of intense curiosity. She watched me as I took my seat, her gaze discerning, analytical. She wasn't just looking at me, she was assessing me. "Thank you for being here, Gabrielle," she said, her voice the same rich, resonant alto that millions of people trusted every week. "I know this isn't easy. Telling the truth is rarely easy," I replied, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. "But it's always necessary." The floor director pointed a finger, counting down from 5 with his hand. The red light on the main camera blinked on. We were live. Evelyn turned to the camera. "Good evening. 4 months. A mysterious writer known only as Veritas has been the most influential anonymous voice in American politics, offering razor-sharp analysis that has become required reading from Capitol Hill to the campaign trail. Tonight the mystery is over. Veritas is stepping out of the shadows. Her name is Gabrielle Vance. And her story is one that could change the course of a major gubernatorial election. He turned back to me. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, sitting under the hot lights. Gabrielle, she began, her tone gentle but probing, you were married to gubernatorial candidate Julian Vance for 12 years. You're also claiming to be the anonymous writer Veritas. But you're claiming something more, something explosive. You're claiming that his signature policy, the Bridgewater Initiative, the very platform his campaign is built on, is not his work. You're claiming it's yours. I'm not claiming it, Evelyn, I said, looking directly into the camera, imagining the millions of people watching, imagining Julian, wherever he was, his face freezing in disbelief. I am stating it as a fact. I am the author of the Bridgewater Initiative. I conceived it, I researched it, and I wrote it. Every last word. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the entire country. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression unreadable. That's an extraordinary accusation. Candidate Vance has built his reputation on being a brilliant policy mind. He talks about this initiative with such passion, such intimate knowledge. You're saying it's all an act. The passion was mine first, I said, my voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. 4 years I was Julian's secret partner. I was his chief policy architect and his speechwriter. I did it because I believed in the work, and for a long time I believed in our partnership. I thought we were building something together. I was wrong. We were building his career, using my mind as the foundation and my silence as the mortar. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. What you're describing is a toxic marriage, a story of betrayal. But in politics that's often not enough. Candidate Vance and his campaign will say this is the bitter attack of a woman scorned. So let me ask you directly, what proof do you have? This was the moment. The fulcrum on which my entire future pivoted. I reached down and opened the manila folder on my lap. I didn't rush. I moved with a deliberate, unshakable calm. Proof, I said, is something I've learned to value. I slid the first document across the polished black table toward her. Let's start with the timeline. This is a printout of the first complete draft of the Bridgewater Initiative. As you can see, the metadata, which has been independently verified by a third-party cybersecurity firm at your producer's request, shows it was created on my personal laptop 2 years ago. I paused, letting her absorb it. That is a full 18 months before Julian Vance officially announced the formation of his gubernatorial exploratory committee. I slid another document over. Next, the core principles. These are my handwritten notes from a brainstorming session in my home office, dated 3 years ago. You can see the initial diagrams, the crossed-out ideas, the evolution of the concept in my own handwriting. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. Then the final piece of the opening salvo. And this, I said, pushing a third printout across the table, is perhaps the most telling. It's an email chain between myself and Professor Alistair Albright at Georgetown, a leading expert in urban economic policy. In it, I am asking for his feedback on what I refer to as Chapter 3, Green Tech Incubators. The date on that email is April 14th, 2.5 years ago. As you can see, I was deep into the specifics of this policy at a time when Julian Vance was, according to his own public record, focused entirely on a federal transportation bill. Evelyn looked down at the papers, then back up at me. The professional skepticism in her eyes was being replaced by something else. Something that looked like dawning, steely-eyed belief. We, of course, anticipated that you would come with documentation, Evelyn said, her voice careful. So we reached out to candidate Vance's campaign for a response earlier today. We showed his campaign manager copies of these documents. The candidate himself agreed to sit down for a brief, pre-taped response. We think it's only fair that you see it. The large screen behind us flickered to life. And there was Julian. He was in his campaign office, the state flag perfectly positioned behind him. He looked handsome, confident, and deeply, patronizingly concerned. Evelyn, he said to the off-screen interviewer, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Gabrielle is a wonderful woman. She was a tremendous support to me throughout our marriage, and I will always be grateful for that. She was a fantastic sounding board for my ideas. He chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound. But the architect of my policies? The secret author of my career? That's frankly absurd, and honestly, it's a little sad. He leaned forward, his face a mask of feigned empathy. Divorce is difficult. It can make people do and say things that are out of character. This sounds like a desperate cry for attention from a woman scorned, and my only response is that I truly wish her peace. The screen went black. The studio was utterly silent. The camera was back on me, a tight close-up waiting for me to crumble, to cry, to get angry. I did none of those things. I met the camera's gaze, my own expression calm and resolved. He's right about one thing, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the silence. I was a supportive wife. I supported him so much that I dedicated my entire intellect, my creativity, and a decade of my life to his advancement. I did not do it because I was weak or because I didn't have ambitions of my own. I did it because I believed the work was more important than the credit. I was wrong. The person delivering the work matters. Their character matters. I held up the final item from my folder. It wasn't a document. It was a small silver thumb drive. The credit is a matter of public record. But the character, that's what the voters need to see. Mr. Vance called me a liar on national television. He painted me as a sad, desperate woman. But a desperate woman doesn't keep meticulous records. I looked from Evelyn to the camera and back again. This isn't about being a woman scorned. This is about intellectual property, professional integrity, and the simple bedrock truth. A man who would build his entire political future on a foundation of lies. Lies he tells about his own family, about the very person he promised to honor, is not a man who can be trusted to tell the truth to the people of this state. I placed the thumb drive on the table with a soft, definitive click. On this drive is the original master file for the Bridgewater Initiative. It's a Word document. The file name is Our Legacy. I named it that a long time ago when I still believed we had won together. The irony is not lost on me. Now it will be my legacy. Mine alone. The red light on the camera finally blinked off. The interview was over. My old life was over. And my new one was just beginning. The moment the cameras were off, a strange, profound silence fell over the set, broken only by a producer's voice in Evelyn Reed's earpiece. Evelyn simply looked at me, her professional mask gone, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't pity. It was respect. "Thank you, Gabrielle," she said, her voice low. "That took incredible courage." As I was escorted back to the green room, my legs felt unsteady, as if I'd just stepped off a ship that had been tossed on a stormy sea for years. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a trembling exhaustion in its wake. But it was a clean exhaustion, the feeling of a battle fought and won. The producer handed me my phone, which had been turned off during the broadcast. The moment I powered it on, it began to vibrate so violently it almost jumped out of my hand. A relentless cascade of texts, missed calls, and news alerts flooded the screen. The first text I opened was from Sarah. It was just a string of capital letters and exclamation points. "You did it. I am screaming and crying and so unbelievably proud of you." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. The news alerts were already painting a picture of the immediate chaos. Vance campaign in freefall after bombshell, crucible interview. Who is Gabrielle Vance? The woman who could topple a governor's race. Metadata experts confirm timeline of Bridgewater drafts. Julian's campaign had already issued a statement, a weak, flailing thing about a coordinated smear campaign by a disgruntled ex-spouse. But the dam had broken. The evidence was too specific, too technical, too verifiable. My truth was concrete. His lies were smoke. The media firestorm was immediate and all-consuming. Journalists descended on Georgetown, tracking down Professor Albright, who confirmed on the record that he had consulted with me on the policy proposal long before Julian's gubernatorial ambitions were public. Former staffers from Julian's congressional office began leaking stories, off the record at first, then with attribution, about how Gabrielle was the real brains of the operation. The narrative Julian had so carefully constructed for himself, the myth of the political boy genius, was crumbling to dust in real time. His poll numbers, which had been so robust just 24 hours earlier, began to plummet. Major donors, smelling a lost cause, publicly announced they were re-evaluating their support. I didn't watch any of it. I took the first flight back to Oregon the next morning. I went home to my little cottage by the sea, turned off my phone, and for 3 days I just breathed. I walked for hours on the cold, damp sand, the rhythmic crash of the waves a soothing percussion to the quiet in my own mind. The weight was gone. The immense, crushing weight of his secret, of my invisibility, had been lifted. It wasn't the giddy thrill of revenge I felt. It was something deeper, something quieter. It was peace. It was the feeling of standing on solid ground after a lifetime of walking on shifting sand. On the fourth day I turned my phone back on. There were hundreds of messages, but one number stood out. It was a Washington, D.C. area code I didn't recognize. I had a feeling I knew who it was. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail. It was Julian. His voice was a ragged, unfamiliar thing, stripped of its usual confident timbre. "Gabby, it's me. Please call me. We need to talk." I didn't call him back. I knew he would try again. The next evening he did. This time I answered. I sat in a comfortable chair, looking out at the sunset painting the clouds in shades of lavender and rose, and I put the phone on speaker. "Gabrielle?" he said, his voice hesitant. "I'm here, Julian," I said calmly. A torrent of words came rushing out, a chaotic mix of anger, pleading, and self-pity. "What did you do, Gabby? What were you thinking? You've destroyed me. Everything we built, gone. Why would you do this?" I listened, my silence a stark contrast to his frantic desperation. He shifted tactics, his voice softening into a wheedling, manipulative tone. "Look, I know I said things. I was under a lot of pressure. I never meant to take credit. It got out of hand. It was always our project, you know that. I always thought of it as ours." It was the most pathetic, transparent lie I had ever heard. The man was incapable of telling the truth even to save himself. "It was never ours, Julian," I said, my voice even and cool. "It was yours. You made that very clear. You put your name on it, you took the credit for it, and you were willing to destroy my character to protect it." He started to bargain. "We can fix this. We can put out a joint statement. Say it was a collaboration, a misunderstanding. I'll give you full credit. We can salvage this, Gabby. We can." I cut him off. Not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable finality. "There is no we to salvage, Julian. And there is nothing left to say. You had your chance to speak and you chose to stand on a national stage and call me a sad, desperate liar. You made your truth. Now I've made mine." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "I have a career to build now. My own career in my own name. Goodbye, Julian." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I blocked his number. The final boundary, the one that should have been drawn years ago, was now firmly in place. The ghost had not only become visible, she had built a fortress around herself, one that his manipulations could never again penetrate. 3 months later, the world looked very different. Julian had, as expected, dropped out of the governor's race, citing a desire to focus on personal and family matters. He had become a political pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at DC cocktail parties. The Bridgewater Initiative, my initiative, was now being championed by another, more honest candidate, who had publicly credited my work as its foundation. My own life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My Substack, now proudly bearing my full name, had become a legitimate media entity with a staff of 2 researchers I had hired myself. The offers that had once been my secret dream were now my reality. I had signed a deal with a major publisher for a book about policy and power, and I had accepted a fellowship at a prestigious nonpartisan think tank in New York. I was no longer the anonymous Veritas. I was Gabrielle Vance, a respected political analyst. My name was my own again, and it was a name that stood for integrity and insight. I was in New York for a think tank roundtable, sitting at a polished mahogany table with senators, academics, and journalists, people who had once been the audience for Julian's performances. Now they were my colleagues. They were here to listen to me. During a break, a young woman, a junior analyst, came up to me, her eyes shining. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you did, it meant a lot to a lot of women, to me." In that moment, I understood the true nature of my victory. It wasn't about Julian's downfall. It wasn't about revenge. It was about this. It was about clearing a path not just for myself, but for others who had been made to feel invisible. I didn't destroy Julian's career. He destroyed it himself when he chose to build it on a lie. I had simply chosen finally to build my own on a foundation of truth. I had spent so many years believing that power meant being adjacent to the man in the spotlight. I know now that real power is having the courage to step into your own light and own it completely. They can steal your work, but they can't steal your talent. They can take your words, but they can't silence your voice, not forever. My journey was a painful one, but it led me back to myself. And I want to know about your journeys too. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim something that was taken from you? Your voice, your confidence, your work? Share your story of reclaiming your power in the comments below. Your experiences matter and your stories deserve to be heard. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and transformation. Sharing this video with someone who might be feeling invisible could be the spark they need to find their own light. Thank you so much for joining me today, for listening to my story. Remember always to own your truth and to tell your own story. No one else can do it for you.